Somalia. 1989. The heat arrives before the light does, a physical weight that settles on everything before dawn, before the camp wakes into its daily cycle of desperation and endurance. The dust is the color of bone. The flies are everywhere. The smell is something that no preparation, no briefing, no prior experience of poverty or suffering fully equips a person to encounter. A woman moves through the camp in simple clothes, no makeup, no jewelry. No trace of the most famous elegance in the world. She is 60 years old and she is walking toward the worst thing she has ever seen. And she is not stopping. She kneels in the dust beside a child. The child is perhaps 2 years old, perhaps 3. Starvation makes age difficult to estimate, compresses the body back toward its origins. She picks the child up, holds it against her chest. Her face, the face that graced the covers of 100 magazines and the windows of 1,000 boutiques, is wet with tears she is not trying to prevent. She is Audrey Hepburn. She has been many things in her 60 years on Earth: a war child, a ballerina, a princess on a Roman holiday, an icon in a black dress at a jewelry store window, a mother in a Swiss garden. This is who she actually is. This is episode 5, The Calling, the missions, and the debt that a woman born in the wrong era of history spent her entire life trying to repay. The summer of 1988 is the summer everything clarifies. The UNICEF call has come. The decision has been made. The yes, immediate, unhesitating, the first unhesitating yes she has given to any professional request in 20 years has been spoken. Now comes the preparation, and Audrey approaches it with the same total discipline she once brought to learning a role. She reads everything UNICEF sends her, the briefing documents on Ethiopia, the civil war that has been grinding through the country for over a decade, the famine that has emerged in its wake, the particular cruelty of food insecurity in a context where political violence is also actively present. She reads the mortality statistics. She reads the field reports from UNICEF workers already on the ground. She reads descriptions of the camps, their scale, their conditions, the demographic reality that the majority of the dying are children under 5. She has been a goodwill ambassador for approximately 3 months when she boards the plane to Addis Ababa. She is 59 years old. She travels without an entourage. No publicist, no stylist, no manager whose job is to ensure that every public interaction reflects well on the carefully maintained image. She brings Robert Wolders and a small UNICEF team. She brings simple clothes. She brings nothing that would create the wrong distance between herself and the people she has come to be with. The camps outside Addis Ababa are vast. This is the word that arrives first and stays vast, because the mind reaches for scale and cannot quite achieve it. Tens of thousands of people existing in a space organized around the single daily question of whether there will be enough food. The logistics of international humanitarian response are present everywhere. The UNICEF trucks, the feeding stations, the medical tents, the supply chains that extend back through multiple countries to the donations of people who will never see this place. The system is imperfect and underfunded, and saving lives every day despite both conditions. Audrey walks into it without pausing at the perimeter. She goes directly to the children. This is not a strategic decision. It is simply what happens when she arrives. The children are everywhere, in the feeding lines, in their mother's arms, sitting in the dust outside the medical tents in the particular stillness of severe malnutrition, which removes the energy for movement and leaves behind only the eyes, which are alert and watchful and devastating. She walks among them and she kneels and she picks them up and she holds them. She cries from the first hour and does not stop. There is no performance management in operation, no calculation of how the tears appear in the photographs being taken by the accompanying journalists. And there are many, because this is Audrey Hepburn, and Audrey Hepburn in an Ethiopian refugee camp is a story that every photo editor in the world will understand immediately. She is not thinking about photographs. She is thinking about the child in her arms, whose weight is wrong, too light, catastrophically light, the weight of a body that has been consuming itself for weeks. She has felt this before, not held it in someone else's arms, felt it in her own body in the winter of 1944. 1944 and into 1945, when the occupation had reduced the available food in Arnhem to quantities that the body cannot sustain. She had been 15 and skeletal, too weak for the ballet classes that were her entire world, eating tulip bulb flower and nettles and whatever else could be found. She had watched her body become something she did not recognize. She had understood, with the clear, pragmatic understanding of a child who has already survived too much, that she might not come through this particular thing. She had come through it because strangers organized and funded by the United Nations had arrived with food in the camps outside Addis Ababa, holding children whose bodies are doing the same thing her body did in 1945. This is not metaphor. This is recognition, cellular, biographical, absolute. Every hollow eye is a mirror. Every distended belly is a memory. Every mother sitting in the dust with a child she cannot feed is the ghost of every mother in Arnhem who watched the occupation take what their children needed to live. The photographs go out to the wire services within 24 hours. By the following morning, they have appeared in newspapers across Europe and North America and beyond. The response is immediate and measurable. Donations to UNICEF's Ethiopia Emergency Fund surge in a way that the organization's fundraising team will later describe as unprecedented for a single media cycle. The combination, that particular face known to everyone in that particular context, known to no one who had associated her with it, creates a quality of attention that transcends the normal mechanics of celebrity charity work. People do not give because a famous person told them to give. People give because something in those photographs lands differently than the aid organization advertisements they have become accustomed to skimming past. The face is familiar. The grief on it is real. The child it is holding is real. The distance between the Tiffany's image and this image is so vast that it forces a recalibration. If this woman, who represents everything comfortable and elegant and aesthetically perfect about the world, has gone to this place and is responding to it with undisguised devastation, then perhaps the distance between that world and this one is not as manageable as it has seemed. People give millions of dollars in the weeks that follow. Children survive who would not have survived. Audrey flies home to Switzerland. She sleeps for 3 days. She gets up and starts planning the next mission. 1989 becomes the year of missions. Sudan arrives in February. The briefing is the most serious yet. Active civil war, fighting between the government and the Sudan People's Liberation Army that has been ongoing since 1983 and has created a humanitarian crisis layered on top of the region's existing poverty. The UNICEF team advises caution about the specific areas she wants to visit. There are landmines. There is active military presence. There is no guarantee of safety in the conventional sense. Audrey listens to the briefing and asks when they are leaving. She moves through war-torn Sudanese villages with the particular calm of someone who grew up in an occupied country and learned early that the presence of armed men and the sounds of distant conflict, while genuinely dangerous, are not reasons to stop moving toward people who need help. The children in Sudan have been caught in a conflict they did not choose and cannot escape, orphaned by violence, displaced from homes that no longer exist, carrying in their bodies and their expressions the specific damage that war inflicts on people too small to defend themselves from it. She holds them, she sits with them, she brings no speeches, no prepared remarks, no political analysis of the conflict's origins or potential resolution. She brings her presence and her face and her willingness to sit in the dust and be with people in their suffering without trying to make the suffering mean something manageable. El Salvador in March. The earthquake of 1986 has left damage that a poor country has been unable to fully address. Villages still operating from rubble, children orphaned in a single morning's violence, communities trying to rebuild without the resources that rebuilding requires. Audrey walks through the destruction with the same quality of attention she brings everywhere. Not the attention of a tourist observing suffering from a safe distance, but the attention of someone who has decided that the only appropriate response to this level of need is full presence. Guatemala. In April, the indigenous Mayan communities in the rural highlands live in a poverty so structural and so long established that it has achieved a kind of terrible invisibility. Not the dramatic, photogenic poverty of acute crisis, but the grinding daily poverty of malnutrition that is endemic, of preventable diseases that kill because there is no clean water and no access to basic medical care. Audrey advocates loudly and specifically for wells, for vaccination programs, for the particular unglamorous infrastructure of survival that receives far less attention than acute emergencies because it does not produce dramatic images. Her approach across all of these missions settles into a consistency that is not strategy, but character. She does not give speeches in the field. She does not position herself for photographs or manage the composition of the images being taken around her. She arrives at a place and she sits down. She is with people. She holds children. She listens to mothers through translators, and sometimes without translators, in the language of eye contact and physical presence that requires no interpreter. She cries when she needs to cry, which is often, and she does not apologize for it. The photographers follow everywhere. The images go everywhere. The donations follow the images. Vietnam in 1990. The country is still defined in the Western imagination primarily by the war that ended 15 years earlier, and Audrey's presence there, a woman whose fame predates the war, who carries no particular association with it, creates a different quality of attention than the usual news cycle around Vietnam. She visits children maimed by landmines, children whose parents were exposed to Agent Orange, and who have been born carrying that exposure in their bodies. She sees in the intergenerational damage of war something she recognizes from her own childhood and from the childhoods of everyone who grew up in occupied Europe. The way violence does not end when the shooting stops, but continues working its way through populations for decades. Bangladesh, in the summer of 1990, massive flooding, the displacement of populations already living at the edge of subsistence, disease moving through the refugee camps with the efficiency of disease in overcrowded conditions without adequate sanitation, cholera, typhoid, children dying of illnesses that a few dollars of vaccination would have prevented. Audrey works 16-hour days in the heat and the chaos and returns to her accommodation each evening, barely able to stand. Robert Wolders is there. He has been there for every mission, traveling with her, managing the logistics of her care, ensuring that she eats enough and sleeps enough to continue. He watches her come home from each day in the field and go through the same process. The collapse into silence, the tears that come after the controlled intensity of the workday releases, the hours of processing that the things she has seen require before she can sleep. He does not try to talk her out of continuing. He does not suggest that she has done enough, that someone else can carry this forward, that her health and her age are reasons to slow down. He understands what this is. He has watched her become in these years the most completely herself she has ever been. To ask her to stop would be to ask her to stop being Audrey Hepburn, not the icon, not the image, but the actual person, the war child from Arnhem who made a promise to herself in 1945 and has been working her way toward keeping it ever since. Turkey in late 1990. The Kurdish refugee crisis has displaced hundreds of thousands of people, families fleeing persecution in conditions of cold and hunger and fear that Audrey recognizes with the same immediate biographical recognition she brings everywhere. She holds babies in the cold. She brings blankets, physically, in her own arms. She sits with traumatized children who do not speak and do not need to. By the end of 1990, she has completed more missions than most UNICEF Goodwill ambassadors complete in an entire tenure. She is 61 years old. Her body is carrying the accumulated cost of constant travel through some of the most physically demanding environments on Earth. She does not discuss this. She looks at the calendar and finds the next mission. Somalia arrives in 1991, and Somalia is different. The briefing is unlike any she has received. Civil war has not merely destabilized the country, it has dissolved it. There is no functioning government. Warlords control territory that shifts with the fighting. The famine sweeping through the South is the worst on the continent in decades, made catastrophic by the complete breakdown of any institutional capacity to respond to it. Hundreds of thousands are dying. The children are dying at a rate that the UNICEF field workers, people who have spent careers in humanitarian crises, describe in their reports with a restraint that makes the numbers more devastating, not less. The security assessment for a potential ambassador visit is the most cautious the organization has produced. Active combat in Mogadishu, no safety guarantees beyond what UNICEF's field team can provide in a context where their own safety is not guaranteed. The recommendation, gently but clearly delivered, is that this particular mission might exceed the appropriate risk threshold for an ambassador visit. Audrey asks when the next flight to Mogadishu departs. She arrives in September 1991 at 62 years old. The airport has taken fire recently enough that the evidence is still visible. The UNICEF staff who meet her are people who have chosen, through professional commitment and personal courage, to remain in a context that most people have evacuated. They are not easily shaken, several of them, watching Audrey Hepburn step off the plane into the Mogadishu heat with the same quality of calm attention she brings to everything, are shaken anyway. She does not perform composure. She simply has it. The composure of someone who grew up understanding that the world contains situations where fear is appropriate and present and not a reason to turn around. The camps outside Mogadishu are the worst thing she has ever seen. This is a meaningful statement given what she has seen in 4 years of missions. The famine here has progressed beyond the acute stages she witnessed in Ethiopia into something that challenges the organizing categories of human experience. Children who are too weak to cry. This detail will stay with her for whatever time she has remaining. The silence of children who should be making noise, the particular horror of a hunger so advanced that it has extinguished even the energy for distress. She walks through the camps without a security detail. This is not recklessness. It is a considered understanding of what her presence means and what it requires. She cannot be the woman who came to be with people if she is surrounded by armed protection that creates a wall between her and the people she came for. She walks among the dying with the openness of someone who has decided that proximity to suffering is not a risk to be managed, but a responsibility to be accepted. She picks up children. Many of them die. Some of them die while she is holding them in her arms, and she does not put them down immediately. She stays. She gives them the presence of someone who will not look away, who will not place them back in the dust and move on to the next photographic opportunity. She stays until staying is no longer what they need. The photographs from Somalia are the most powerful images of her UNICEF career. Not because they are more skillfully composed than the others, but because they capture something that the previous mission's photographs had been building toward. A complete dissolution of the distance between Audrey Hepburn, the icon, and the reality of what she is doing. There is no trace of Hollywood in these images. There is no trace of Givenchy, of Fifth Avenue, of the careful construction of public elegance that defined her for 30 years. There is only a woman in her 60s covered in dust, holding children who are dying, crying without stopping, and not leaving. The response to the Somalia photographs is enormous. Emergency aid to the region increases. Donations to UNICEF's Somalia Fund reach levels that will, in the accounting of lives saved versus lives lost, translate into thousands of survivors. The United Nations begins discussing intervention. The machinery of international response, always sluggish and always underfunded, accelerates because Audrey came. Because she showed the world what was happening in a way that the world could not look away from. She returns to Switzerland from Somalia and collapses. Not metaphorically, she is physically incapable of normal function for several days. Robert Wolders is waiting. He takes care of her with the quiet completeness that has defined his presence in her life for the past 8 years. She cries for days. She sleeps. She gardens when she can stand. She sits with him in the Swiss evenings and does not talk about what she saw because there are no words for it that are not inadequate. And he understands this and does not ask. Then she looks at the calendar. She finds the next mission. She starts preparing. By 1992, the accounting of what these 4 years have been begins to become visible. 50-plus countries, every continent except Antarctica, Ethiopia and Sudan and El Salvador and Guatemala and Bangladesh and Turkey and Vietnam and Somalia and Kenya and Thailand and Ecuador and Honduras and Venezuela and Mexico and dozens more. An itinerary that would exhaust a person half her age, undertaken by a woman in her early 60s who has been carrying for her entire life the physical legacy of wartime malnutrition and the emotional legacy of everything that wartime does to a child. 10 to 15 missions per year, months spent in conditions that strip away every comfort and most of the structures that make normal life manageable. Returning to Switzerland between missions not to rest in any complete sense, but to process sufficiently to go again. She goes again, every time. The why is not complicated, though it is deep. The debt she owes is specific and personal, and has been present in the architecture of her consciousness since she was 15 years old and British soldiers came through Arnhem with food. She had been saved by people who owed her nothing, by an international system organized around the principle that children should not die of hunger, regardless of the political circumstances that created the hunger, by strangers. She is the stranger now. She is the system's visible face. She is the reason that people who have never heard of UNICEF's work in Bangladesh pick up a newspaper or turn on a television and understand, because they are looking at Audrey Hepburn crying in the dust of a refugee camp, that something is happening that requires their response. One child saved is worth more than any Oscar. She has said this in the rare speeches she gives at UNICEF fundraising events, tells her story, the hunger winter, the liberation, the UNRRA feeding stations, the debt she owes and is trying to repay. The audiences who came expecting the elegance of the icon receive instead the testimony of a fiver. The difference is everything. In 1992, the Presidential Medal of Freedom arrives. George H.W. Bush presents it at a White House ceremony. Audrey Hepburn holds it and feels something she did not feel when she held the Oscar in 1954. Not the vertigo of recognition, not the disbelief of a young woman discovering that she belongs in this world after all, but the quieter, more durable satisfaction of a person who has done something that needed to be done. The Jean Hersholt Humanitarian Award from the Academy follows, the institution that gave her one Oscar and nominated her for 4 others, and then, in the My Fair Lady year, decided her actual voice was not enough. Now, it is giving her the award that, of all the awards the industry has to offer, means something that exists outside the industry entirely. She will not live to receive it in person. It will be presented at the 1993 Academy Awards ceremony, posthumously, and her son Sean will accept it on her behalf. But that is still ahead. In the summer of 1992, Audrey is planning the next Somalia mission. The famine has not resolved. Nothing in Somalia has resolved. And the international community's response, while improved from the previous year, remains inadequate to the scale of the dying. She has been there. She knows what is happening. She has photographs in her memory that no camera fully captured because the camera could only record the external evidence of the thing, not the thing itself. She is going back. There is a pain. It has been present for several months, abdominal, persistent, the kind of pain that a person who has spent 4 years ignoring her body's signals in service of something more important has learned to file under things to address later. She is 63 years old, and she has been living at a pace that her doctors have noted, with the careful language of medical professionals who understand their patient, is not sustainable. The pain is probably nothing. She has too much work to do to investigate something that is probably nothing. She ignores it. September 1992, Somalia, the last mission she will ever complete. She arrives in the camps and she does what she has always done. She walks in, she sits down, she holds the children, she cries, she stays. She raises the alarm in interviews with the journalists who accompany her. She tells the world again what is happening here and what the world must do about it. The donations come. The awareness spreads. Children survive. She returns to Switzerland and collapses in a way that is different from the previous collapses. Robert Wolders, who has watched her come home from 50 missions and has learned the difference between the exhaustion of someone who has given everything and the physical signal that something is wrong, knows immediately that this is different. He insists on the examination. This time, she does not resist. The results come back in November 1992. Appendicular cancer, rare, advanced. The doctors are not encouraging about the timeline. Audrey Hepburn hears this news and her first question is about the children in Somalia. This is Legends of America.